Marinero, the Sick Podcast. It was deadline day. Last week, the Carolina Hurricanes signed Jesperi Kotkaniemi to a one-year, $6.1 million offer sheet in which the Montreal Canadiens had 7 days to match. The deadline was give or take at around 5:30 this evening, and about 15 minutes before that, the Montreal Canadiens let it be known to the entire hockey world that they would be walking away and would not be matching Kotkaniemi's one-year, $6.1 million deal. Stu Cowan of the Montreal Gazette, are you surprised?
I'm not. I wrote a column shortly after Carolina made the offer sheet saying I didn't think Marc Bergevin should match. I thought he should let Kotkaniemi go and then use the first-round pick or both picks that he would get in compensation to go get a experienced center, and that's exactly what he did. I think that with Dvorak coming in, he's a center who's sort of what the Canadiens were hoping Kotkaniemi would become. Proven commodity, which is something they need right now, especially after Philip Deneau going to LA. So I think it was two smart decisions that Marc Bergevin did on what turned out to be a very busy Saturday afternoon.
The Sick Podcast is brought to you by Essentia, the world's only natural memory foam mattress. Go to myessentia.com/sickpod and use code SickPod for a free pillow with your purchase. Essentia Beyond Organic Sleep. Well, if people were sleeping, they woke up after. About an hour and 15 minutes or so later, Marc Bergevin announced, and the Canadiens announced, that they acquired Christian Dvorak, centerman with the Arizona Coyotes, who has 4 years left on his contract at $4.45 million, a 25-year-old centerman who can play the wing. Many believe the Canadiens are better today than they were yesterday. But before we get to that, Stu, and we will, let's go back on Kotkaniemi now. I thought the Canadiens should have matched because it would have been too big a hole, already weaker at the center ice position with Deneau going to Los Angeles, unless they end up making a trade to acquire another centerman, which they did. Everyone believes, or most believe, the Canadiens are better today than they were yesterday because right now, Dvorak is a more complete player than Kotkaniemi. What the future holds and whether or not Kotkaniemi can actually fulfill that potential that a lot of people see in him, that remains to be seen. But I guess, Stu, I should have known because Marc Bergevin and Dominic Ducharme were not the presidents of the Jesperi Kotkaniemi fan club. There's only so much that they could say openly, but you take a look, he always had the leftover line mates. He was a healthy scratch at times during the playoffs. His regular season only had 5 goals and 20 points, so you can kind of understand. And they were looking for more consistency from him.
Yep, a number 3 overall pick, and 3 years later, they scratch him for the final 2 games of the Stanley Cup final to play Eric Staal. And that just shows you. And I think that led, I think Jesperi Kotkaniemi was looking for a way to get out of Montreal, and Carolina provided it, and also gave him, it's like winning the 649 lottery with $6 million for 1 year for a 21-year-old kid. So we all know about Jesperi Kotkaniemi's smile. I can just imagine how big it is tonight back home in Finland. This is like a perfect outcome for him. He makes $6 million next year. He leaves Montreal. He goes to Carolina. Fresh start. Rod Brindamore is the coach. I think they're probably going to use him at the wing there to start. They have depth at center, which I think will be a good move. I think he needed a fresh start. And you're right. I don't think Marc Bergevin or Dominic Ducharme were presidents of his fan club. And I didn't think they were going to match the offer. They didn't. Matching the offer would have also thrown the Canadian salary structure totally out of whack. Kotkaniemi would have become the second highest paid forward behind Brendan Gallagher. So if you're paying Kotkaniemi $6.1 million, or I'm Nick Suzuki's agent, and when he's a restricted free agent next season, I'm starting at like $6.5 million. I'm saying, look at my player's role, look at his ice time, look at his points, and you're giving this guy 6.1. We want at least 6.5. So as you mentioned, Dvorak's making 4.45. It's a reasonable contract for a guy who produces the way he does, and it keeps the Canadian salary structure in place moving forward. And I think that's huge. And Carolina, I wouldn't be shocked after January 1st. Carolina can sign Kotkaniemi to an extension. They can't trade him for a year, but I wouldn't be surprised if Kotkaniemi signs an extension after January 1st for somewhere maybe in the $4 million range for 5 or 6 years. There's not supposed to be under the table agreements with the salary cap. But I think in this case, it's a case of, look, kid, we're going to get you out of Montreal. We're going to give you $6 million. We're going to throw in that $20 signing bonus. This is another dagger into Bergevin is back. And then you're going to owe us one down the road. Pierre LeBrun reported that the Hurricanes had tried to trade for Kotkaniemi before the sheet, which means that they have interest in the player. They think he's a quality player. And I think Kotkaniemi's only 21. He still could become a quality player. But I just don't think it was going to happen in Montreal. And he's the latest example of the Canadiens, whether it's not drafting well or not developing players well. He goes in that long list of first-round picks who haven't worked out in Montreal. It's going to be interesting to see how he works out in Carolina. But at least in Dvorak, the Canadiens are getting a proven commodity, and they know what they have going into next season.
Look, as far as the first-round picks, I mean, I will say this. Ryan McDonough was a first-round pick, and he was a great player. It's not Trevor Timmins' fault that they traded him. Max Pacioretty was a first-round pick. He was a great player. It's not Trevor Timmins' fault that they traded him. Carey Price, first-round pick, great player, and he's still here. Mikhail Sergachev, a great player, not Trevor Timmins' fault that they traded him. Having said all that, I will say this, that in the last 10 or 12 years or so, Sergachev really is the only guy who was drafted in the first round that is looking good elsewhere anyway. There's a lot of guys that just did not look good at all. And that's unfortunate. And that's something that they definitely have to take a closer look at. But, as much as sometimes they don't draft the right player in the first round, and this whole Kotkaniemi thing, I mean, it's, he's gone now. I get it. But I said, and I maintain, the Montreal Canadiens drafted the wrong player. The player to draft was Brady Tkachuk. And if it wasn't going to be Brady Tkachuk, the next player to draft would have been Quinn Hughes. Jesperi Kotkaniemi, every time the Canadiens draft by position or by need, they get it wrong. They wanted to get bigger on defense. They drafted Tenorti. They wanted to get bigger at the forward position. They drafted McCarron. They wanted to get a number one centerman. They drafted Galchenyuk. They wanted to get a number one or a number two centerman. They drafted Kotkaniemi. Every single time they got that wrong. And I spoke with a hockey executive today who said, Tony, the Canadiens aren't the only team that at times drafts by need or by position. But what most teams do, or what is a rule of thumb, or should probably be the logic, you can draft some players by position every now and then, but don't do it in your first two rounds. In your first two rounds, you should draft the best player available. And every time they get away from that, they blow it. Now, having said all that, Stu, I will say this as well. I think the Montreal Canadiens rushed Jesperi Kotkaniemi. He shouldn't have been in the National Hockey League at 18 years old. He should have been in Finland for a couple of more seasons. He probably should have been in Laval for one full season. They tried to rush him. They got excited when they saw 34 points, figured if he put on weight, got bigger, got stronger, he could end up being the number one guy. And it didn't work out. I hope he rehabilitates himself in Carolina, finds new teammates there, a new system, a new coach, like you said, less pressure, and explodes. But it probably just was never going to happen here anyway. We'll never know.
Well, 2 years ago, the Canadiens did draft the best player available when Cole Caulfield fell into their lap because so many teams ahead were afraid of his size. He was the best player available when their pick came up, and they took him. And that, the future, nobody knows what the future holds. But right now, that's certainly looking like a good pick. And Kotkaniemi, I still remember going to the first rookie camp game he played in Laval, and they were playing against Ottawa, and they were playing against Brady Tkachuk. Brady Tkachuk was dominant, and Jesperi Kotkaniemi looked totally lost on the ice. I remember leaving. I wrote a column that night saying, "Boy, this kid's nowhere near ready to play in the NHL." But it was also only maybe his fourth or fifth game ever on a smaller North American rink, and he had a great training camp and good preseason. And Mark Bergevin likes to say, "Players make the decisions for you," and they thought he was ready to play in the NHL, and his rookie season was quite successful until he sort of hit a wall. I think it was around game 50, which isn't shocking for a kid who had never played that many games, a new language, new country, new everything. So I don't know if that hurt his development so much. I think with the Canadiens, and I wrote a column about this recently, they don't have trust in their young players. They don't seem to be willing to let them make mistakes and learn from them. Victor Mete talked about that when he went to Ottawa, saying it was so nice to go on the ice knowing if you make a mistake, you're not going to be in the press box the next night. So it's been a long time with the Canadiens like this. I mean, you go way back to Doug Wickenheiser when he was a number one pick, and they made him a healthy scratch for the first game at the Forum when Denny Savard was a number 3 pick, played that night and was the first star. And, Wickenheiser, his career didn't work out here, and sadly ended up dying from cancer later. But, I wrote a column this week, and it was sort of tongue-in-cheek, but it really wasn't. Like, moving forward, the Canadiens should think serious about just trading their first-round pick every year and getting somebody who's proven, because you go down the list, the last first-round pick who has had a legitimate impact on this team was Max Pacioretty. And, and his career didn't end well in Montreal. It got ugly with him at the end. So, as I said, whether it's the drafting, the developing. It's a long streak of first-round picks who just haven't worked out for one reason or another. Nathan Beaulieu, Alex Galchenyuk, go down the list, and it's like 7-8 years in a row.
Yeah,
one pick didn't work out, and what they've done now is they've traded one of the first-round picks they have next year for Christian Dvorak, who's a proven player. They know exactly what they've got from him.
Yeah,
and so it's something I think the Canadiens should think about moving forward, because for whatever reason it is, they have a really hard time with their first-round picks, and I think part of it is they just don't trust them. I don't think they trusted Kotkaniemi in the Stanley Cup final. They trusted Eric Staal more. Eric Staal is probably not going to be in the NHL this year.
Stu, part of me, the Canadiens also have to understand one thing, because, I don't know if this is ever going to come out, but I tend to think that Kotkaniemi's body language, some of the answers he gave the media, I think there's some things the Canadiens didn't like there, right? He let it be known that he wasn't happy with his ice time. He let it be known that he wasn't happy with the usage. He let it be known that he actually was happy when he went to the American Hockey League and talked about how much he learned under Joel Bouchard and all that stuff. The Canadiens, for the most part, are a relatively conservative organization, and they don't like when players say stuff like this, or they mope, or they groan and all that stuff. But they have to understand one thing. When you take a player that you drafted 3rd overall and you bring him up right away and you make him an NHL player at 18 years of age, that player has a little bit of swagger after, right? You've given him a little bit too much too soon. And once again, I think
that can be a good thing, Tony. Swagger can be a good thing too.
It can be a good thing. Anyway, Christian Dvorak could be a good thing too, because a 25-year-old centerman who can play left wing, who plays hard minutes, who's a very good two-way player, who scored 17 goals last year. That would probably translate to a 25-goal season in a full season. Players who are usually in Arizona don't produce all that much, and he might actually produce more in Montreal. Canadiens are hoping the same thing with the Max Domi effect when coming over to Montreal in the first season. Goes up against other teams' best players. The only thing in Dvorak's case, and this every scout will tell you, he's probably a step behind. He doesn't have that extra gear, so his foot speed is probably not great. If he would have that, he'd be a number 2 centerman on almost every team. And as it stands right now, still almost every team would like to have him. So right now they're probably celebrating in Montreal. And if you want to have a celebration, sophistication event rentals, live music, DJ sound systems, tents, chairs, tables, decor, lighting, photo booth, TV screens, one-stop shop. Call them in Montreal, 514-570-5770. I want to get to Dvorak in a second. I keep putting it off, but there's a few things we have to talk about Kotkaniemi. You talked about Pierre LeBrun said the Canadiens were involved in trade talks with Carolina earlier this summer. The trade never materialized, and then Carolina said, let's get a deal done or else we're going to offer sheet him, all right? I can tell you this, Carolina is not the only team they talked to. The Montreal Canadiens shopped Jesperi Kotkaniemi around this summer. So that's one of two things, or maybe one of 2 or 3 things. One, they knew they weren't going to get to a contract agreement with him, so they shopped him. 2, they're just not sold on him and want to be better right away and don't think they, or 3, maybe a combination of both. So,
and also, Philip Deneau, you mentioned Dvorak's stats. He also won 52.1% of his faceoffs.
Yeah, that's good.
So who was going to be taking the faceoffs this year? Kotkaniemi had struggled in the faceoff circle. Suzuki, yeah. Jake Evans was over 50%, but he wasn't taking faceoffs against the other team's number 1 centerman either. He wasn't going up against the Connor McDavids of the world or Sidney Crosby in the faceoff circle. So the Habs needed somebody who could win key faceoffs. And you're right.
And Evans is injury prone, right, Stu? I know it's probably a little bit unlucky. I'm not going to blame him for suffering concussions, but 4 concussions in a span of 2 years and 9 months.
And carried off the ice twice on a stretcher out cold from concussions. So, and you mentioned his foot speed, which isn't the best, but Corey Perry proved last season that, if you're smart and you have hockey skills, you can overcome a lack of foot speed. And Dvorak's stats speak for himself, 17 goals last year. As I said, I think he's the player. Obviously, when you select a player number 3 overall, you have high expectations. But I think if last year, Jesperi Kotkaniemi had put up the numbers that Dvorak put up, we wouldn't be here talking about this today. The Canadiens would have already locked Kotkaniemi up to another long-term deal, and he'd be playing in Montreal, but he didn't. And as you're right, they just, the thing I remember, no, don't forget, Cole Caulfield was also a healthy scratch to start the playoffs this year. About. And then when Kotkaniemi got back in for game 2 against Toronto and he scored the only goal in that game, remember he gave that 4-finger salute?
Yeah.
The press box?
Yeah.
We asked him about it the next day, and he said it was basically a sign to the other guys up there who were healthy scratches. And I got the idea there was almost an us against them mentality. Like, I'm sure Caulfield and Kotkaniemi and Suzuki.
You're right. It could be interpreted that way. It could be, you know what? They doubted us for, and here I am on the ice and I'm scoring.
Yeah.
You know, the hell with them for doubting us. And it didn't look good. But it just didn't.
Good. You know what, Tony? When Kotkaniemi came here, one of the things that was really refreshing about him is that, you know, you mentioned the Canadiens like to control the message, like to control the players, like to try and control the message in the media, like to have control of everything. Kotkaniemi came in here as a young kid. He was a breath of fresh air. He'd say what was on his mind. He was funny. Even though his English wasn't great, he was a lot of fun to talk to in the locker room. He's about the same age as my son, so I got a kick out of talking to him and really liked him as a kid. I thought he was a nice kid. And with everything he was going through, a new country, a new language, the fishbowl in Montreal, not being able to go anywhere without being recognized, I thought he handled it well. But as you say, the Canadiens sort of lost confidence in him. And I think he lost confidence maybe in the Canadiens. Like, I'm not going to get a chance here. Like, I can't, anytime I screw up, I'm, you know, and then at Bergevin's press conference after the Stanley Cup final, when I think it was Arpon Basu who asked him about, you know, do you have confidence in Kotkaniemi as a second line center going into next season? And he basically said no. You know, then a long answer, he said no. And I'm sure Kotkaniemi was listening to that too. And I think it was just, you know what? I think it was just the Canadiens. It was time for them to move on from Kotkaniemi, and it was time for Kotkaniemi to move on from the Canadiens.
Kotkaniemi, like you said, is a huge winner in all this, right? His value on the marketplace, probably about $2.5 million. He gets $6.1 million. If it works out in Carolina, they're going to sign him to an extension. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if they do. Like you said, we have to keep note of this as well. His agent, Marcus Leto, doesn't represent hundreds of players in the National Hockey League, but he does have some, obviously. And one of the players he also has is Teuvo Teravainen of the Carolina Hurricanes. So there's a relationship there with Marcus Leto and Carolina Hurricanes GM Don Waddell. So for all of those, and the reason why I bring it up is for all of those who are saying Marc Bergevin blew it, he should have locked up Kotkaniemi. Two things you need to understand. One, there's a ton of restricted free agents who have not yet signed a contract because they're waiting for the possibility of offer sheets. Their agents are telling them, let's wait, because we might get offer sheeted, so you might get more. Two, Bergevin wasn't overly convinced with Kotkaniemi. Like we talked about, he tried to trade him. So, I mean, for those who are saying he should have signed him, I'm convinced that Tom Dundon, who wanted to pay back the Montreal Canadiens a little bit of revenge after offer sheeting Aho a couple of years ago, I'm convinced he told Marcus Leto, or someone told Marcus Leto, from the Carolina Hurricanes, or someone sent the message from them saying, don't have your client signed. He's going to be offer sheeted with Carolina. So Kotkaniemi, new fresh start, new coach, new line mates, new teammates, less pressure in Carolina, very good team, $6.1 million. This guy's a huge winner.
Tony, the 649, I checked on the website, the 649 draw tonight is worth $6 million.
Wow, I got to play.
Kotkaniemi just won the 649 at 21 years old. As I said, he's the same age as my son. I can just imagine my son, if he got $6 million today, I'd be dancing around here. It's you know, and the thing is, like, moving forward, the Hurricanes, if Kotkaniemi becomes a restricted free agent again next year, they have to qualify him at $6.1 million again.
Yeah.
If he had stayed in Montreal, it would have been the same thing. As I mentioned earlier, I'm pretty sure the Hurricanes are going to sign an extension with Kotkaniemi after January 1st for less than $6 million. It would make sense. It just doesn't make sense to pay the kid $6 million for 1 year after scoring 5 goals.
Hush, wink, wink. Let's get this done. Everybody's happy.
Would Kotkaniemi have agreed to an extension in Montreal? I don't think so. I think he wanted to get out of here. So if the Canadiens match it, now you got to, as I said, it throws your whole salary structure out of whack. And now next season, you got to match that offer in qualifying, or he becomes an unrestricted free agent. So it just didn't make sense on so many levels for the Canadiens to match it. As I said, it's time for Kotkaniemi to move on from Montreal. It's time for the Canadiens to move on from Kotkaniemi. And if Kotkaniemi turns into the player I think the Canadiens were hoping he would be when he was a number 3 pick, if he's like a 25 goal scorer, a 70-point guy, a number 1 center, then the Canadiens are going to look bad and Carolina is going to look good. But I think the Canadiens are going to look better next season with Dvorak in the lineup than they would have looked with Kotkaniemi, especially since, are the Canadiens going to play Kotkaniemi regular? Are they going to give him regular lineups? Are they going to, or is it going to be like last season? If he makes a mistake, in the playoffs anyway, you make a mistake, you're a healthy scratch, you sit in the press box and you end up giving that 4-fingered salute when you do score afterwards.
My God, so much to handle today and so much to digest. I need some whiskey. Johnny Bootlegger's Whiskey, old-fashioned, both refreshing and authentic to the classic cocktail, available now at SAQs near you. You know what's incredible in all this? You go back to the 2018 draft when the Montreal Canadiens had the 3rd pick overall in the draft. The Buffalo Sabres had the 1st pick. The Carolina Hurricanes had the 2nd pick. The Sabres draft Dahlin. The Carolina Hurricanes draft Svechnikov. Waddell was clearly doing some homework and was aware of who Kotkaniemi was because he had a great second half of the season, made his way and some of those scouting reports and some of those mock drafts and stuff like that into the top 10. Having said that, it wasn't unanimous with Kotkaniemi. Some had him at 5, some had him at 8, some had him at 10. I think he was as high as 17 or 18, which really makes me even more upset to think the Canadiens drafted him, because why take a guy at 3rd that some have at 10, 15, and 18? Why don't you take a guy that's anywhere between 3 and 7 on everyone's list? No, but anyway, I digress.
Hindsight's 2020, but Brady Tkachuk would look pretty good in a Habs uniform.
Well, you're right about that. But you know what's incredible is that today, Carolina, who had the 2nd pick and has Svechnikov, also ended up getting the 3rd pick from the draft, and they have Kotkaniemi.
One of my lasting memories of Kotkaniemi is a TV coverage from the draft. And remember that after they selected Kotkaniemi, the camera went to the crowd, and that woman in a Canadiens jersey went like, who is this guy? Like,
who the hell is this guy?
That was sort of a lasting memory from that. And it's easy to forget Kotkaniemi's 21 years old. He's also one of those tall, lanky kids who's still growing into his body.
Yeah.
As I said, he's sort of like a Great Dane puppy, right? Awkward and limbs and everything else. When he fills out, I'm sure he's going to be like 220 pounds. The thing is, like, he's going to Carolina. If he can't do it in Carolina now, he's never going to do it, because if he's not motivated, it
won't matter, Stu. He made $6 million. You and I have to work till we're 150 years old to make that money.
Well, you know what, though? You don't get to the NHL without having a real pride and as you say, a little bit of a swagger is a good thing. You don't get to the NHL unless you have confidence in yourself and you want to prove something to yourself.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I was talking with Mike Camilleri the other day, who was in town for BioSteel camp. And I was asking him, he's president of the company or CEO, and I was asking him, at this camp with all, the Connor McDavid there, they had Josh Anderson from the Canadiens, Jonathan Drouin was there, Ben Sherratt. And I asked Camilleri, I said, what are they trying to get at this point in the season at a camp like this? Is it just get the feel on the ice? And he said, that's part of it, but part of it is showing the other guys what you got. These guys are competitive. They've been competitive
for sure.
5 years old. So they go on the ice. They're not going all out, but they want to show, like, look what I got type of thing. They're pro athletes are confident, cocky guys. That's how they get to be there. And they like to strut their stuff. So Kotkaniemi now is going to be looking forward to strutting his stuff in Carolina. I think Rod Brindamore will be a great coach for him there. Certainly help him in the gym. I mean, Rod Brindamore is in better shape than some of the players on his team, I think. And maybe help Kotkaniemi put on some more weight, get a little bit. He's
always been a fitness freak, that Brindamore. But look, I'll say this. Christian Dvorak wants to prove something as well. You take a look at social media since this trade went down, and there are a lot of people familiar with this player saying, incredibly underrated player, and Montreal is going to absolutely love this guy. So you know what? Everyone's talking about the fact that and here's a question coming in. Could Dvorak be a piece to get Eichel? No, absolutely not. Right, Stu? Not happening.
I think you can forget about Eichel.
So now everyone's talking about the fact that Carolina used a tool that was available to them, which was offer sheeting Kotkaniemi, and they got their guy. I think the Canadiens took advantage of a situation as well. What situation am I talking about? The Arizona Coyotes are a very average team. Christian Dvorak is one of their better players. I would imagine that the new head coach, Andre Tourigny, would love to have Christian Dvorak more so than have a first-round pick and a second-round pick. But because he makes $4.45 million over the next 4 years, and the economic and financial situation within the Coyotes is not so good, the Canadiens took advantage of the situation because Dvorak is a player that you would think Andre Tourigny would love to have in his lineup, and Arizona would not want to trade because one of their better players.
Yep. And with Dvorak, if you go back and look at his numbers in junior, he played in London, which is probably about as pressure-packed market in junior hockey you can get. I mean, so many people who play there say it's like an NHL environment. They sell out that arena. He lit it up there. So he went from playing in London with the full rink there every night, and it's like a mini NHL team in London, to playing in Arizona. And, you know, I've been to games in Arizona, and man, it's you wonder how the players stay awake where there's, you know, nobody in the fans, there's no atmosphere. It's a beautiful arena. It's a beautiful location. There's nobody there. So now it looks like the Canadiens are going to start the season with only 7,500 people at the Bell Center. Obviously, things could change between now and the season starts. But I think he's one of those guys who's going to feed off the atmosphere of playing in a hockey market, being somewhere where people care. You know, it can be a double-edged sword, right, with the pressure in Montreal playing. But I think when you come from a market like Arizona where nobody really cares, there's no atmosphere in the rink, nobody knows who you are. I think for a guy who came out of London, had success there, I think he's a guy who's going to really enjoy playing in Montreal and enjoy the environment. Ben Sherratt spoke about that when he decided to come here. Josh Anderson spoke about that, how the atmosphere at the Bell Center is reasons that they wanted to come here. And I think for Dvorak, I think the atmosphere here, I think he will feed off it.
33 points in his first season, 37 in his second season, only 7 points, but in 20 games in his third season, 38 points in 70 games in his fourth season, and 31 points last season in 56 games, 17 of which were goals. We talked about all the things that Dvorak does better right now than Kotkaniemi. He's a better two-way player. He's a better face-off man. He's a better goal scorer. He plays hard minutes. He's more reliable. He's more consistent. The list goes on and on. I love that. What worries me is further down the line. Take a look at what Dvorak's done in the National Hockey League longer than Kotkaniemi. It seems that what you see is what you get, and you kind of get the feeling that, what can he be? More so than probably a point every other game? Kotkaniemi, if he ends up fulfilling that potential that some people see in him, he might become a 60-point guy one day. So I think the Canadiens are better right now, but I think there's more upside for Kotkaniemi. He may reach it, he may not, but I think there's more upside for Kotkaniemi.
Well, yeah, I mean, might's a big word too. As I said, you know, they've got a proven commodity here. Here with Dvorak, and you know, as you say, big minutes. He's a guy that Dominic Ducharme is going to trust to play him in whatever situations they need to play him in, which they didn't with Kotkaniemi. I'm sure Dominic Ducharme was probably happy tonight that Dvorak's joining the team. You know, getting him used to that system that they play. They're going to have a full training camp this year, obviously, which will make a big difference from last season. And yeah, I think it's, as I've said before, I just think it was, you know, the Canadiens. The other thing too is that the salary cap is so important now in the NHL, more so than ever, since it's a flat cap at $81.5 million. So not only do you have this certainty of a proven commodity of Dvorak on the ice, you also know he's only going to make only $4.45 million for the next 4 years. Don't forget, they're going to have to re-sign Suzuki. They're going to have to re-sign Caulfield. At some point, they're going to have to re-sign Romanov. So the salary cap is the reason why all these teams have salary cap gurus on the team now, because they're as important as a coach or a GM.
Yeah,
as far as making sure everything fits. So he just fits. He fits on the ice. His contract fits into the salary structure for the team moving forward. So now when Nick Suzuki comes up for his contract, Brendan Gallagher is the highest paid player at $6.5 million, a proven 30-goal scorer. You know, so Nick Suzuki, you know, he's not going to come in and say, I want $6.5 million because Kotkaniemi got 6.1.
Yeah.
It's gonna, and that's the way the NHL works. With, you know, as I said, if I'm Nick Suzuki's agent and Kotkaniemi's making 6.1, I'm not asking for any less than 6.1.
So Stu, it's all going to play itself out at camp, but I'm going to give you my lines for now. Actually, why don't you start? Give me your lines with Christian Dvorak in the lineup.
You caught me off guard here because I need to look through all the changes they've had in the roster. Go ahead.
Okay, hold on a second. I'll give you mine.
Yeah.
Nick Suzuki in between Cole Caulfield on his right and Tyler Toffoli on his left.
Yeah,
Christian Dvorak with Josh Anderson on his right and Mike Hoffman on his left. Jake Evans with Brendan Gallagher on his right
Drouin.
and Jonathan Drouin on his left.
Mm-hmm.
And Cedric Paquette with Yoel Armia on his right and Matthew Perreault and or Arturi Lehkonen on his left. And of course, Byron is going to be out for the first couple of months of the season. And that's the way I see the forward lines shaping up. How about you?
That's the thing. You know what's sort of cool about that, Tony, is that when you look at those lines that you mentioned, you can move guys around a lot.
Yeah.
You know? There's guys like you're talking about having Jonathan Drouin on a third line. If Jonathan Drouin plays the way Jonathan Drouin can play, or the way they hope he can play, he could be a first line player. And there's a lot of guys. Brendan Gallagher, you got Brendan Gallagher, a 30 goal scorer on the third line there. There's a lot of the Canes don't have that superstar player right now, but they have guys that you can move up and down in the lineup.
Yeah.
I still think they're going to have a hard. I think the loss of Shea Weber is going to be enormous, both on and off the ice for the team. But as I say, they're a better team now than they were before 5 o'clock today. At least
if you could place your bets on MyBookie and you go to mybookie.ag/the Sick Podcast and use code SickPicks to double your deposit, bet, win, get paid. Who picks up more points for the upcoming season? Jesperi Kotkaniemi or Christian Dvorak?
That's you asking me?
I'm asking you.
Christian Dvorak, I would say.
All right, so there you have it. You heard it.
The next season, I'm not sure because I don't think Kotkaniemi is going to go from the player he was in Montreal to all of a sudden like a 20 goal scorer like that. Maybe he will. I think, as I said, I think if they move him to the wing, I think it'll help him. He's got that shot. It would take the defensive responsibility off of him and put him with good players. I mean, he played with so many different line combinations here. It was tough for him to get any kind of vote. And that thing in the back of your mind, if I screw up, I'm going to get benched, or I'm going to get dropped to the fourth line, or I'm going to get moved around, or it's going to be, one of the reasons that the Danault, Tatar, Gallagher line was so successful is they stayed together for 2 years. They played together. They knew each other. They knew they could feed off each other. Doesn't happen a lot in the NHL anymore. And with Kotkaniemi, he was all over the place. So if Carolina moves him to the wing, puts him with two regular players, a good centerman and another good winger, I think it'd be close. Like it would be close between him and Dvorak. But just from today, what I know today, I mean, if we find out where Kotkaniemi's playing once the season starts and what their lines are, I'll change my mind. But as of right now, I would say I'd have my money on Dvorak for more points.
By the way, on Friday night, I tweeted out that, Marc Bergevin and Jeff Molson have had their share of heat over the last 6 weeks, of course, with the drafting of Logan Mailloux and the fact that some people don't believe the Canadiens are a better team now than the team that finished the playoffs. And I just thought that if they were going to walk away from Jesperi Kotkaniemi, they were going to announce a trade which would make them win the day because they want it to be better. Anyway, it happened. Lucky guess.
Well, a lot of people thought Bergevin would, the Hurricanes said they were going to match the offer for Aho like within 24 hours. And a lot of people were thinking maybe Bergevin is just getting revenge. He's going to wait till the last minute and leave him twisting in the wind. Obviously, Marc Bergevin was on the phone trying to find out what he could get. What can I get for this first round pick? What can I get? Dvorak, I think, was probably his target right from day one, maybe even before the offer sheet.
And Stu, I think he did great considering that everyone saw him coming from a mile away.
Well, of course. And you know what?
Right.
I mean, I've been critical of Bergevin in the past, and I Red Fisher was my mentor in this business, and he always told me criticize, be fair, and I always try and do that. And being fair for Marc Bergevin here, he made a good move. He made a good. I thought he made two good decisions today. One was not to match the offer sheet, and the other one was to make the trade for Dvorak. So, as I said, I think the Canes are a better team now than they were before 5 o'clock.
Always a pleasure, Stu. Talk to you soon.
All right, Tony. Anytime, bud.
Bye-bye, KK. Hello, Devo. Marinero, the Sick Podcast.